Greetings, dear viewers, ladies and gentlemen. This is our weekly this dialogue with the program. I'm Shifa Raulako, and my guest today is Garrison. She is the San Francisco Bay Area-based independent journalist. She's been following new developments unfolding in Ethiopia. So we're going to spend some time talking about the peace truce signed between the federal government and TPLF and other related issues. Do stay with us, and thank you so much for joining me. It's really good to see you again.
You're welcome, and thank you for inviting me.
As you have been following things unfolding here in Ethiopia, the federal government and TPLF have reached a historic agreement to put an end to the conflict and hostilities by solving their issues amicably through peaceful negotiations. And this move has been hailed as a milestone in Ethiopia's determination, to pursue peace over war by means of sober and cultured discussions. This is definitely something to be celebrated, right? What are some of your thoughts about the truce?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that it is so welcome. It is so welcome that there may finally be an end to this awful war.
Yeah.
And I hope, and any people of good faith are welcoming and hoping for it. I checked my notes and found that your parliament created the National Dialogue Commission in December 2021. And 3 months ago, I heard Professor Mesfin Araya, the commission chair, say that Ethiopia was losing everything to this war, its resources and its young people. And so I'm so glad and so hopeful that that really is over. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, Ethiopia had the greatest number of people displaced by conflict in 2021, more than 5 million people, and a significant number of them had been displaced several times. When I was there in April and May, I visited 5 IDP camps, 3 in Sokoto, near the Tigray border, near the Amhara border with Tigray region, 1 south of Dessie on the A2 highway, and another Dupti refugee camp in Afar, outside the Afar regional capital of Samara. There were also IDP camps on the side of the road all up and down the A2 highway, and on the side of the road all around Samara. Alistair Thompson and I spoke to the relief coordinator in Afar, who seemed to have no help. And he said that a great number of Afaris had simply disappeared into the desert, fleeing the TPLF. No one knew where they were. And the widely circulated estimate of the dead is 500,000. So I don't know just how these statistics were estimated, but however accurate they are, the suffering and destruction has been horrible. So first of all, I just welcome this effort and in every way hope it works.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the great messages we can draw from the peace agreement is the fact that Ethiopia is now capable of solving its problems on its own. On the other hand, I think we can also reach this conclusion that foreign interference in its internal matters is not necessary, as it might lead to unnecessary complications. So what do you make out of the truce in this regard? Does this make any sense to you?
Well, I think, to be honest, first, although this is a truce and both parties are negotiating in hopes of good outcomes, I don't think it would have happened if the ENDF had not won the war on the battlefield. Prime Minister Abiy said that Ethiopia had gotten 100% of what they asked for. The TPLF said that they made painful sacrifices, particularly regarding disarmament, but it seems like the Ethiopian government is not trying to impose a harsh victor's justice. Instead, it is trying to look forward and consider a model of justice and reconciliation that was established by the African Union. So second, after studying the peace agreement, which I believe was signed on November 2nd, and the implementation agreement signed on, I believe, the 12th. In Article 3 of the initial agreement, it says that parties agree to the restoration of federal authority in Mekelle, and that the restoration of constitutional order in the Tigray region. That's all good. The Constitution does not provide for secession by armed force, but Tegaru and Amhara both lay claim to land that the Constitution still defines as part of Tigray. And I believe it's now under Amhara regional administration. And that this territorial dispute was central to the conflict. So I imagine, and I hope that the federal administration will be able to find a way to mediate this dispute. And I also hope that the Constitution will be amended as soon as possible, because I agree with all those who said that the ethnic regional boundaries and the ethnic identity cards have caused tremendous ethnic strife, far worse than existed beforehand. My host, when I was in Addis Ababa, my gracious host, told me that when he got his identity card, he tried to tell the authorities that his grandmother was this, his grandfather was that, and his mother was this, and his father was that, and et cetera, et cetera. So he didn't want to define himself that way, but they said, okay, you have to be something, so we're going to call you a Somali. I think it would be good for everyone if that kind of ethnic definition faded away. I mean, without, I'm not talking about destruction of history and cultural traditions, but that kind of official ethnic identity and official ethnic territorial boundaries. I hope they become part of the past. Okay, so in the implementation agreement, there was one clause I'm very impressed with. It says, all humanitarian relief shall go through the inspection and notification of the federal government. There shall be only 2 checkpoints, which would be established, one at the entrance from point of loading and or warehouses, and at the entrance of the destination areas. I'm really impressed with this because throughout the past 2 years, we've heard unfettered access. There's a siege. Aid isn't being allowed into Tigray. I saw otherwise. When I was in Afar, I saw convoy after convoy heading for Tigray, and I asked several of the drivers who were on their way back, did you have any trouble getting in? And they said no. But unfettered access during a war is an unreasonable demand. Of course, the government had to know what was in those trucks. So that is being acknowledged now in this agreement, and there's an agreement that there will be several checkpoints and where they'll be. I think that's great. Now, there's a phrase, disarmament of heavy weapons will be done concurrently with the withdrawal of foreign and non-ENDF forces from the region. So given that, where do the foreign and non-ENDF forces, I assume that means Amhara militias and perhaps Fano militia, what do they have to withdraw from? Also, I don't think it's clear, I don't think it's been established that Eritrean troops are in Ethiopia or in Tigray, but that's obviously what this is about. And the Western press has vilified Eritrea twice as much as it's vilified Ethiopia, and it's vilified Ethiopia a lot over the last 2 years. So there's potential for disagreement about this. There's significant potential for disagreement about where these forces are supposed to withdraw from, and whether they're there at all, and what is the timing. It says concurrently. So one would hope that everyone will act in good faith and not start, and one side won't start accusing the other of not having kept its agreement.
As you know, people have also been impressed by Ethiopians' reactions following the peace truce, which shows that all they want is peace, development, and prosperity, and not this, disastrous and destructive war. So, what is the message being conveyed here, and that you have made out, especially in relation to other African nations that are still, that found themselves in conflicts?
Well, that's one of those questions that's really for Africans to answer, what the message is for them. I can better speak to the attitude of the West, which has, and particularly that of the US, my own country, which has been typically arrogant, extremely arrogant for the past 2 years, presuming that this is something or other that the US has to decide or settle. A few days after the agreement was signed, there was a headline in the New York Times that said, Biden has to do this or that to make sure that the war in Ethiopia doesn't resume, more or less. And obviously that's for Ethiopia to decide. And there's been a chorus of naysayers, Western pundits who've been very critical of Ethiopia for the past 2 years, who at first predicted that the peace agreement would fail, found great fault with it. Some of the worst complaints were about the resolution of accountability for any atrocities committed during the war. And there were preposterous proposals that the US somehow settled this, that these things should be settled in a Western court. On October 28th, the Canadian Parliament's Subcommittee on International Affairs held a hearing in which the usual pundits and scholars charged genocide and demanded prosecution. And they talked about invoking international justice. Well, that was before the agreement was signed. So hopefully that will be shelved. But I think it's more for the West to recognize that this is an African solution to African problems, and it deserves the West's respect. It's up to Africans to decide what it means to them.
Yeah, I think the AU has played a commendable role in bringing the two sides to this wonderful result. So to what extent can this agreement be a good example of the same of these African solutions to African problems?
Well, again, I'd say that is for Africans to decide, not for me to decide. I'm being very careful about this because the West has been just so arrogant, officials, and especially the US, arrogant and threatening, as though it should be able to tell Ethiopia what to do. So I'm very hesitant to say anything like that. But I was very impressed with the way that the African Union defended African solutions for African problems throughout this, and with the way that African members of the UN Security Council did the same. And I believe there were several times when representatives of the African Union addressed the many hearings about this on the UN Security Council. And they always defended African solutions for African problems. I think this independence has been developing for some years. In 2015, I saw the AU refuse a US and Western request that they organize some kind of intervention force to go into Burundi. They refused to do it. And Burundi, like Ethiopia, asserted its sovereignty by the end of that episode. And it's actually now, it was under sanctions then, it's no longer under sanctions. One thing about the African Union's independence is that I've heard discussion of making the African Union less dependent on foreign funding, particularly Western funding. And I think that's a great idea.
You brought up a very important idea here. And the former presidents Uhuru Kenyatta and Olusegun Obasanjo have also played great role, which can be, I think, exemplary for other leaders on the continent, that African leaders need to come together to find peace to issues of countries rather than, adding fuel to fire, leaning to one side. So how exemplary has their roles been in your view in this regard? And what is the message here to some Western nations and some individuals that are still, want to undermine Africa through this, their snobbish, so to speak, attitude when it comes to Africa?
Well, I'm glad that they were the mediators. As I understood it, for years, Ethiopia preferred Obasanjo and the TPLF preferred Kenyatta. And so I guess there was some negotiation about that. I would rather Mike Hammer, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa, had not been as present in the talks as he was. He was present in Pretoria. He went flying off from Ethiopia to Pretoria with Getachew Reda. And at that point, the US State Department issued an arrogant statement asserting that Hammer would be there as a participant, not just as an observer, as a participant. And it was an aggressive way of asserting that nothing gets done without the agreement of the US. I noticed that although he has been in Nairobi, the recent State Department press release said that he was there to observe and facilitate. It was not as aggressive as the previous one. I don't know why, but that change in tone was welcome. I think we'd all have to be naive to think that Hammer wasn't engaged in a number of conversations that we don't know about. We don't know just how much influence the U.S. may have had in drawing up the ultimate agreements. The amount of power that they have in the world is undeniable, and their determination to throw their weight around is equally undeniable. But their signatures are not in the agreements, and the EU didn't have a representative there. So I'd say it's an impressive assertion of African independence, African solutions for African problems, led by African leaders, Obasanjo and Kenyatta, and the representatives of the two parties.
Moving on from there, Anne,
Okay.
as you know, this rehabilitation work for the displaced and rebuilding of destructed areas are the tasks ahead that need the collaboration of Ethiopians, Africans, and the whole globe for that matter. So what roles need to be played that you see here by every actor, every concerned actor?
Well, I would like to see my own government vote favorably to restructure and relieve a lot of Ethiopia's International Monetary Fund debt burden. the U.S. is the majority contributor to the IMF and has virtual veto power over many decisions. Since 2008, it's been an even larger majority contributor. So I would hope that they will do that, and I'd like to see it include a lot of debt relief, not just debt restructuring. I think the West, and the U.S. in particular, played a particularly destructive role in this war by lending political, diplomatic, and narrative support, possibly other kinds of support that we don't know about, but definitely political, diplomatic, and narrative support. So I think it should do its best to make amends and recognize that it's to everyone's benefit to have a strong Ethiopia. And Ethiopia has the potential to be so strong and to overcome, for one of Africa's greatest problems, which is electricity poverty. With the GERD, you have the potential to provide electricity to all Ethiopia. And I would hope that the industrialized nations will do everything that they can to assist with that. As I believe that China has contracts to develop the electricity infrastructure, and I'm sure that's all been held up by the war. When I was in Lalibela and on my way to Sakota, I noticed that the roads had been about half built, and it was very rough going on the roads that had not been paved. And there was a camp near Lalibela where a Chinese concern that had been paving the roads had been camped, and they departed because of the war. I don't know, but I would guess that the same thing happened with the installation of electricity delivery infrastructure. So I hope that will go forward as soon as possible. I hope the EU is generous. I hope China and Russia and all of North America are generous, and I hope they will dismiss all the punitive sanctions that have been threatened and actually imposed. I hope that Biden will repeal his cancellation of the African Growth and Opportunity Act as soon as possible. And I also hope that these sanctions on Eritrea will be lifted. Really punishing sanctions were imposed on Eritrea in November 2021, including its exclusion from the SWIFT system of conducting international financial transactions. There are 4 countries excluded from the SWIFT system. They are Russia, Eritrea, Iran, and North Korea.
Okay, and thank you so much for your wonderful ideas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for staying up late for us. Thanks a lot.
Okay, not that late. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. Well, dear viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Thank you so much for having been with us. Until I see you next time with another program, it's goodbye from me, Shfaralak. Stay safe and take care.